Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, noon Eastern time here on the Eastern Seaboard, the East Coast. A rainy Thursday, but a happy Thursday nonetheless. And you know why? It's because Thursdays are when we do Talent Experience Live, the show that covers everything that you need to know in talent acquisition, talent management, recruiting, and human resources as a whole. I am your host, Devin Foster, and this program is proudly brought to you by the good folks here at Phenom, whose purpose is to help 1 billion people find the right job. That is the reason why we host this show, why we hosted I Am Phenom a couple weeks back, why we have spectacular blogs, spectacular webinars, and everything in between. So if you're interested in learning any more, head on over to phenom.com, where you will most likely be smacked right in the face with our intelligent talent experience platform, figuratively, of course. This platform helps candidates find the right fit faster, employees evolve in their current roles and beyond, recruiters achieve some next level productivity and efficiency, and managers get to build better teams through data analytics and automation. Now, automation's twin, well, not its twin, but like the exact thing that automation is powered by is, of course, artificial intelligence, which we have too. We have super slick AI and machine learning that powers everything over the entire platform. So head on over to phenom.com, as I mentioned before. Well, now that the bills are paid, I mentioned there for a moment that a couple weeks ago we had I Am Phenom, an event hosted in Philadelphia with over 1,600 attendees, everyone from keynote speakers talking about thought leadership, customer stories, training day, and everything in between, as well as some great partners that were there. We had an entire kind of partnership row, if you will. Not like your typical conference where we walk you into a big void room and everyone tries to outdo each other with big banners and signs and everything like that. No, a very intimate alley, I will call it, which has never been said before, where you can really have conversations with folks in the industry. Nobody's trying to outdo each other with booth size or anything like that. It's like, hey, what are my problems? How can I help you? And one of those partners was Survale. And I had the wonderful opportunity to sit down with CEO Jason Moreau of Survale. And we chatted a lot about software and solutions, specifically how when organizations implement software, they get everything up and running, right? Occasionally there's, some kinks in the hose where you have to, sort things out and make sure that the technology itself runs properly. But the other half of that, the side that most people don't talk about, is the adoption rate, is finding out how your team is actually enjoying this technology. And then the inverse of that is how the candidates themselves, the people that we're doing all of this for, how they find the technology useful, or if it, has some hiccups in the road. And it's not just technology that we are looking for answers for. A lot of times experiences encompasses the whole thing. You could have the smoothest, fastest application process on the planet where you are able to click apply and get your application submitted in less than 2 minutes and 30 seconds, less than 30 seconds itself. However, candidates could still have a bad taste in their mouth. And what Jason and I talked about, I'll be completely honest, I had a list of questions for him, and I was simply captivated by our conversation, where we got into, it could be something as simple as a recruiter showing up late. We all love to, blame candidates for ghosting and recruiters for ghosting and things like that. But there simply could just be a few things that really give candidates the opportunity to say, I don't know if this is the right fit for me. It could be something as simple as internet connection. And that's where Jason really talked about the power of surveys and getting some of these insights and correcting those things before they cause your organization issues long term. Because as we all know, the life of your organization depends on the talent and the candidates that you bring in the door. So if you're not getting real-time feedback or feedback in a timely manner to figure out if there's something else, a part of this candidate journey, this candidate experience, that could be going wrong, you need to fix it before, you are scrambling for talent and not getting the right fit in your organization. So without any further hesitation, let's jump back into our 1980s DeLorean, I think, and go back to the future where I chat with Jason at I Am Phenom. Here's the clip. Jason, thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
Great.
Awesome. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. We kind of, as tradition on this show, like to ask folks how they end up in the human resources world, because I've never seen a kindergartner or a first grader on their first day of school hold up that sign that says, I want to work in HR. So it seems everyone has a twisted path. How did your path end up here?
Yeah, I said nobody ever.
Exactly.
That is an interesting journey because, well, thanks first for having me on the show.
Of course.
But, my journey actually started out as, I'm a techie. I developed software and I was probably 23 years old developing software, and it was kind of the early pioneer days of the internet. Mark Andreessen with his Netscape browser and Mosaic browser. And I saw the opportunity there, and my first kind of project was building a job board called CareerExchange.com. CareerExchange.com took me down to San Francisco, the Bay Area, where we expanded and grew. And in the back of my mind, I always knew that, a job board is going to be significantly impacted in a recession. And so I was always kind of on the lookout for how do we build something stickier. And along the way, employers would post their jobs in Career Exchange, and they would call back a day later and say, hey, turn that job off. It's crashing my email. And so there was a light bulb went off there, and we ended up building what is known as an applicant tracking system. Yeah. So we built Sonic Recruit. Sonic Recruit, we then, divested Career Exchange and, ran with Sonic Recruit, the ATS, throughout the early 2000s in the Bay Area. And we sold primarily to the mid-market, upper mid-market North American companies. And then from there, Sonic Recruit expanded to Sonic Onboard, Sonic Perform, and we started fulfilling this suite. And then in 2011, that company was acquired. Now, one of the big things at Sonic Recruit that we focused on was technology experience. Where candidates would go to our clients' corporate career sites, and we always built them so that they looked and felt like you're never leaving that corporate site. Yeah. Really important. So we always identified that candidate experience back then, but we didn't really know it as candidate experience. And so we were acquired, and we all kind of drifted apart for a while, different areas. And about 4 years later, I came back, and I got the itch to build another company. Yeah. And then I started realizing that's who I am. I like to build. And so I called up a few of the ex-colleagues from that company, and candidate experience kept coming up. Yeah. And so we jumped in, and we started building product around how do we measure candidate experiences. Whether it's with technology, that was our first approach, is let's build a piece of technology that integrates into the career site, reaches out to the anonymous job seeker or candidate on that site, and surveys them. And how is it searching our career site? Yeah. What's your perception of us as an employer? So it kind of evolved that way. So that's how we landed in this candidate world. And then obviously through prospects and clients, we started integrating into the back end systems and really measuring, people, process, and technology. Yeah. Is really where we have come from.
Absolutely. It's interesting because it sounds like you back in the early days with the ATS system, you almost worked as an employer experience surveyor, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
It got this feedback that, we can't handle all of these emails.
Right.
Not to say you made it harder, right, to get that, but you made sense of it all. Yeah. I want to ask you, obviously this has been a passion of yours far before it was trendy to talk about. Right. What are some of the changes that you've noticed, drastically over the years, and maybe even more drastically over the past year or two, right? When you look back to first we want it to have the same look and feel as our, organizations, to now
Right.
candidates want chatbots. They want questions answered now.
Yeah, that is so true. Back in the past, you'd go to apply, say, from a candidate's point of view. A candidate would land on a career site. They'd be like, oh, that's a great role for me. I'm going to apply. And honestly, back in the late 2000s, 2010s, for example, candidates would literally have to answer 50, 60 questions on an application. And, without naming any kind of technologies out there, but, candidates then all started banding together and saying they'd go to these corporate sites and they would recognize the ATS URL and they would bounce off of that site. They'd be like, I am not going through that experience again. Terrible technology experience. And, over the years, you've probably started to recognize that when you go to submit an application, it's a minimal friction now to be able to apply, where that's really what employers have adapted to, is listening to the candidates saying, I don't want to fill out 50, 60 questions to apply for this role. I want to be able to give you some basic information, circle back on me, and we'll fill in those blanks and gaps throughout the rest of the process.
I mean, I've filled out paper applications where I know, dating myself a little bit, but back in the day for restaurant roles where it was like 50, 60 questions of what you do in this situation. I'm like,
an hour and a half later.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't get the job. It didn't work out for me, but it's fascinating to hear that, because I had an inverse situation when I graduated college and started to enter the workforce, where we had MacBooks and it would parse some of my information. And so I'm not going to name any of the ATS systems, but I would hunt out for them and be like, oh, look, this is only going to take me 5 minutes. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know if I should thank Apple or the ATS for that, but nonetheless, the experience continues to change. And I want to ask you, as we enter this digital kind of time frame for applicants, and I'm starting to read pushback online of, you have to optimize your resume for algorithms and things like that. Is that sort of information trickling into the candidate feedback and what they're getting, where they may feel not given a fair shot when it comes to applicant processes?
Yeah, that is one of the bigger complaints that we see through some of the feedback that when we're asking candidates for feedback, is that they're feeling disconnected. There's just too many algorithms. They know that there's algorithms and AI involved, and if you're not understanding what that AI technology is, there's a bias. There's, how do I surface my resume? How do I surface my profile to the top? So people are trying to trick the systems. It is a problem.
It is. And I think it circles back to, in my opinion, and I could be way off here, it's about that checkbox, right? At the end of the day, the application, it should be seamless, gather as much information as you can. And then the goal of the technology is to have one-on-one conversations, right? To get to know the individual at the end of the day. And I think when we, talk about these sort of things, some of that occasionally gets lost, right? So is that another aspect that you kind of learn about and hear from, is maybe past the technology, but really the experience of the candidate, maybe with a hiring manager or with, a recruiter?
Yeah, every candidate out there ultimately wants to be able to talk to a manager, right? That's your goal, or a recruiter at minimum. They want to be able to talk to people. They want to be able to reach out and, put technology aside for a second, and how do I get my best shot? Because sometimes a candidate's best shot is their personality, and personalities don't always shine in a resume. That's very true.
That makes sense. And I think also from the inverse of a hiring manager, sometimes they're able to get a feel of the candidate for something that you can't put on an application, right? My wife still works in the recruiting space. When she recruits for her team, occasionally she'll slip up and say a word that you wouldn't be able to say on television, to put it nicely. And that's just because of the environment that they work in. It may not be her, it may not be her team, but the customers and clients that they work with, she wants to make sure that they're comfortable. You can't put that on an
It's
application.
It's impossible.
It would not go over well.
Yeah.
I want to ask you. Obviously, we're talking really about experiences from a feeling perspective.
Yeah.
When it comes to quantitative and qualitative aspects of this, how does Survale really dive down and get some of the numbers and metrics around it?
Yeah. So, pretty much the way Survale works is we integrate into the back-end system. So whether it's an ATS, CRM, HRMS, we do the deep end integrations, and it's typically a one-way data flow from those systems and the data transported over to Survale. And when the data comes over, we bring in a lot of operational data as well. So we know a lot of things to not ask because we already know the answers. And then so we're really focused on asking experiential type questions. So asking those quantitative questions, what's your perception of us as an employer? And are we your first choice or last choice? As far as like an employer to work for. And then obviously then you want to drill in and ask the qualitative type questions. And then on the back end, bring the analytics to life and really surface themes of what's happening. So surfacing themes of, where do we need to improve? What are our top 5 issues affecting our brand? And then what are the top 5 positive things that are happening and surfacing within our company? And how do we replicate that?
Makes sense. And
Yeah.
I think it creates an interesting kind of situation, specifically with, are we your top employer or not, right?
Yeah.
The organization has to reflect and say, number one, is our employer brand accurate, right? Are we portraying what we want to be portrayed?
Right.
Or are we after the wrong candidates, right? Are we fishing in the wrong ponds? From your experience, is that a tough conversation for teams to have internally?
It is, definitely understanding your brand is super important. If you have a good brand, your pipeline tends to be filled with quality candidates. And the quality candidates ultimately are being effectively hired into a role that fits them. And when you start making poor decisions and poor brand, you're putting in people that probably don't belong in those roles. You end up with a lot of turnover. So that's really where the importance starts to come into play there.
It's almost a mindset shift of the traditional ROI that we think of from talent acquisition.
Right.
Back when I was a recruiter, it was candidates that applied,
Time to fill.
completed applications, click to apply through rate, all of those. What are some of the key ROI metrics that you look at and work with organizations for?
So some of those are still true today. Like, time to fill, how do we understand our processes so we can have higher offer acceptance and higher retention rates. So it does still come back to some of those fundamental metrics and ROI, opportunity cost, if we can streamline our process, build our brand more efficiently, hire better people, that also becomes, and hire faster. It also becomes that opportunity to fill a seat and, staff a project up quicker as well. So a lot of those same fundamentals do translate to satisfaction and experiences. It's just looking at it through a different lens sometimes.
Okay. All right. And I want to ask you, obviously you've worked with a number of clients. Do you have any of your favorite success stories or common challenges, I guess is a good way to start?
There's some really good success stories. I'll give you one that was like a really early days of Survale and a technology-based company based in the Bay Area. And they operated in 4 different regions, the North America, EMEA, APAC, and India area. And when they're analyzing the interview performance of the managers, they're surveying candidates that have been interviewed in all these different regions, and it all translates back to things on social media and how it affects their brand out there. And when they started analyzing the interview experiences throughout the 4 different markets, they realized 3 of the markets were doing fantastic, high numbers, high NPS numbers. And then, but in India, the region there was lagging, and it was lagging significantly. Not by just 1 or 2 points, but 20, 25 points. And so when we went and reviewed the data with the client, we drilled in on interview, and then we said, well, let's drill in on the one region, India, and you'd see all this like negative satisfaction. But it was as simple as really identifying a set of managers there, and they just didn't know how to interview, and like that was as simple as that. And it's like, oh wow, like it's not that they're trying to do this; they just don't know any better. And so they actually just basically went and trained the managers on how to be prepared, what to do in interviews, questions to ask, questions not to ask. But within 90 days, their brand and the metrics skyrocketed, and actually surpassed one of the other regions.
Wow.
So yeah, it's a really cool story, and I love that story.
That's awesome, because it truly does come down to the interviews at the end of the day, right? We talk about these digital experiences, everyone's striving to be the best of the best, but at the end, it's people, right?
And I'll give you another story, and this is probably one of the ones that is more common nowadays. Is organizations, they have their talent acquisition team, they have their managers, the hiring managers, and all these people are touching candidates, and the way they touch candidates affects perception and their brand. And one of the easiest wins of gathering feedback about those interview experiences with candidates, based on a recruiter, based on a manager, is measuring what the feedback is from a candidate. And really, from there, it's like every individual has their personal NPS score. So every recruiter can walk around going, hey, my NPS is a 65 this month, based on interviews with 300 candidates. And from there, it's really taken this leap into organizations are saying like, well, we want to make sure we're aligned in our messaging. So therefore, we're starting to monitor this. And if you're saying these things and doing these things, you're going to get good feedback. We're going to be taking this NPS score of yours, and it's going to be part of your quarterly goals and bonusing and compensation. So it's really taking these satisfaction rates to another level, and aligning organizations.
It's so important to do that. I remember from my days as a recruiter, our quarterly bonuses were based on applications, right? And if you're on the edge or close to it, you can fire off 1,000 emails to get 500 apply clicks. Are they the right people for your business? No, they're clogging up your everything. So that's awesome that you can put a numerical value to that. And then probably I would imagine drill down even deeper when it comes to the reason why your NPS score isn't a 65 is because you've shown up late to 4, 5, 6 interviews, right?
That's actually one of the number one. I don't know how you did this, but that's actually one of the number one complaints.
Really?
Yeah, is the candidates feel, whether it's for the talent acquisition recruiter or a hiring manager, candidates are feeling as if their time is not being valued, and it is showing up late. It's asking repetitive questions or multiple interviews, and everyone's asking the same question, like why is that happening?
And I imagine even running over. Right? Like putting my candidate hat on for a moment. Yeah. You currently have a role, right? You're looking for a new one. You sneak away on your lunch break or whatever it may be.
Babysitting.
Exactly. Now you have to, come back to work and explain where you were. So that's fascinating, but it's teachable, right? And coachable at the end of the day, where you can work with, much like the example where you showed interview skills, you can work on time blocking, right?
That's right.
Making sure that there's
use
enough of a gap
to help with these things.
Reschedule when you need to, things like that.
That's
awesome. I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation. I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to touch on before we jump into it? What any other success stories, major challenges that you're seeing, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, the major challenges still are is this whole concept of candidate ghosting. It's still a big problem. Candidates ghosting you on interviews, and the worst is really candidates ghosting you on day one. We've seen clients where they're hiring in high volume roles, like whether it's manufacturing roles or drivers or whatever. They're hiring in bulk. And a lot of this hiring is just completely automated, where they haven't talked to anybody, and they've been offered a job, and you're going to start in a week, and these people aren't showing up, and the ghosting is a real issue. And whether is that a ghosting issue because nobody actually reached out and talked to me, or is it a ghosting issue because technology's still not keeping me engaged in that time period?
Yeah.
You need to find that out because it's a big expense.
Absolutely. I mean, it's especially if you're counting on those folks. You
Yeah.
mentioned, some of these transportation roles and things like that. That's, logistics is.
I didn't get my package today. I wonder why.
Yeah, no, exactly. Also, you'd expect somebody to meet that individual before they're, behind machinery or whatever it may be. But I think there's a healthy balance there. And candidate ghosting, you have to build that relationship with the candidate. It's tough to do economies of scale, right? Large number.
Yeah.
But if, it's a competitive job market, if someone's able to get a job offer and accept without speaking to a human for X amount of dollars, they can leverage that for Y.
Right.
With another organization.
You've got to keep them engaged. And, I think, a lot of employers think like, oh, they accepted our job offer.
Yeah.
And they're not starting for sometimes for 2 months.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't reach out and talk to them or have some kind of communication, there's other organizations still knocking on their door. It doesn't stop.
Yeah. And it can be, from my perspective as a recruiter, it can be awkward, right? It's, hey, what is that balancing act of talking too much and not talking to them enough?
And I also think like it also circles, that whole point circles back to the employer brand.
Yeah.
If you have a strong brand, that person that's joining you in 2 months will likely still be excited, even with the minimal engagement. So it's just this vicious cycle of like how important brand is and all these different things that affect your brand.
Yeah. No, it's everything. A lot of people think of, your brand at the end of the day is just, buying or selling widgets, right?
Right.
But it's so much more than that. It's, wearing your brand on your t-shirt or wherever you want to be.
Yeah.
So this is awesome and exciting stuff. I want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
If folks want to learn more about Survale, where can they go to get some of these insights?
Yeah, the easiest way is just go to survale.com.
Okay.
You'll find everything there, and we can reach out and talk to you.
Awesome.
Thank you,
We'll
Devin.
drop the link in and everything like that, and I appreciate your time.
That's great.
Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Have a good one. Special thanks once again to Jason. As I mentioned, it was a truly fascinating conversation. We talked about some of the common challenges that organizations are still facing, whether it be ghosting or even some of those really intricate details of the interview process, right? He mentioned NPS scores and things along those lines. And it could be something as simple as a recruiter being overbooked where they can't make it to interviews on time, or being, conscious of when that half hour is up in order for the candidate to go on with their lives, right? Nobody wants to sit in a 4-hour interview. I can promise you that. I've done it. It's no fun. But at the end of the day, I think what we're all working towards is a better experience for the candidate. And yes, technology has a lot to do with that, but also it could be translations for career pages, as he mentioned with the story in India. It could be, a recruiter showing up late, the same questions being asked. And I know that's something that we alluded to at I Am Phenom, where getting interview notes beforehand and getting summaries and things like that when you're heading into that next round of interviews could be the differentiating factor that a candidate chooses your organization over another. Again, small detail, but being on the same page with things like compensation, with things like what a typical day looks like. A lot of recruiters are asked to do, quite frankly, very difficult things when it comes to recruiting for hyper-specific positions. I've had conversations with Cliff in the past, Cliff Jerkowitz here, about hiring for technical or developer type roles and not knowing the difference between Python or Java or something along those lines could be a huge differentiating factor. So getting that real-time feedback from candidates is only going to help you improve, and also hopefully make some of those conversations when you have your annual review, when you look at performance reviews, where it says, hey, we have this information, Mr. or Mrs. Recruiter. How can we rectify this? How can we, teach and coach you to be more successful, to have a more fruitful career, but also help give our candidates the best experience as well. So again, thank you so much to Jason. If you are interested in more, he mentioned at the end of that video, you can head on over to survale.com. We'll also, do a nice little blog recap and post that out probably within a week or so, and get clips out there because everyone loves clips. Next week, we have a Talent EXP. We're going to be joined by Ed Newman, which I'm very excited about that conversation. For those of you who are not familiar, he did have a book released at I Am Phenom called Phenom Doe. So maybe check that out. I don't know if there's a digital version, but if not, shoot Ed a LinkedIn note. I'm sure he'll get you a copy, sign it, date it, the whole nine. But super excited about that conversation next week. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a safe, happy, and healthy weekend. And we will see you next Thursday, as it will be the 16th of May already. Crazy. Time is flying by. But once again, thank you so much. I love doing this, and have a great day.